Can you imagine the taste of a $112 million betrayal served cold by your own family? My name is Ellie Vance, and at the inheritance dinner, the one the whole family had been whispering about for months, my father finally made it official. He lifted his champagne flute, his hand steady, beaming at my younger brother Leo, who had been back in our lives for precisely 28 days. The entire estate, he declared, his voice resonating through the formal dining room, the company, the properties, the investment portfolios, all $112 million of it will now pass to Leo. My mother, Carol, nodded with a serene, proud finality. She turned her gaze to me, her eyes like chips of ice across the table. "He's earned it," she said, her voice clear and cutting. "Far more than you ever did." A scattered, awkward applause broke out around the room. I felt the weight of 20 pairs of eyes on me. I rose from my chair, the silk of my dress rustling in the sudden silence. I walked the length of the long mahogany table, my heels sinking into the plush Persian rug, and stopped beside my father's chair. Without a word, I placed 4 items directly in front of him, one by one. First, the aged medical and financial power of attorney they'd both signed years ago, the paper creased from its time in my safe. Second, the heavy brass ring holding the keys to the house. Third, the single, intricate key to the document vault in his study. And finally, a thick manila envelope, its flap sealed with the dark red wax of a notary. I looked directly at Leo, who was smirking with victory. "Congratulations," I said, my voice just a whisper. Then I turned and walked towards the grand archway leading out of the room. My father let out a dismissive chuckle, likely assuming it was a dramatic, tear-stained farewell note. He picked up the envelope, tore it open with a flourish for his audience of relatives and old friends. I saw his eyes scan the first line, then the second. The champagne glass slipped from his grasp, shattering on the polished hardwood floor. A collective gasp went through the room. "You have got to be joking," he roared, slamming his fist on the table so hard the china rattled. "This is impossible," Mom screamed, her face contorting in confusion and rage. Leo froze, his triumphant smile gone. Every head in that room swiveled towards me, my back still to them as I continued to walk away. If you've ever poured your soul into something only to be told you're worthless, leave a comment and tell me your story. Because what happened in the moments that followed is a masterclass in why you should never, ever underestimate the one who works in silence. Stay with me. 5 years earlier, my life was in San Francisco. I was the lead AI developer at a booming fintech startup, pulling down a salary that was well into the 6 figures. I managed a brilliant team of 15 people, and we were on the cusp of a Series C funding round that would make us all very comfortable. My life was a whirlwind of venture capitalist meetings, coding sprints, and keynote speeches. And then, at 5:47 a.m. on a Tuesday, my phone shattered the quiet of my apartment. It was a charge nurse from a hospital in Denver, Colorado. My father, Arthur, had collapsed in his office from a massive cerebral hemorrhage. He was being rushed into emergency surgery. 4 hours later, I landed at DIA and raced to the hospital. But he was already in a medically induced coma, a tangle of tubes and wires keeping him alive. Just 2 days after that, my mother went to a clinic for what she dismissed as a nagging cough. It was stage 3 pancreatic cancer. Her chemotherapy regimen started the next Monday. She withered before my eyes, losing over 30 pounds in less than 2 months, becoming so frail she couldn't lift a glass of water. That same week, I took an indefinite leave from my job. I packed what I could into 2 suitcases, found a subletter for my apartment overlooking the bay, and flew back to Denver, moving into the same childhood bedroom I'd left a decade before. My company was supportive at first. "Take all the time you need, Ellie," my boss said. They had my position filled within 9 days. That first year was a nauseating, surreal blur of beeping machines and the sterile, chemical scent of hospital corridors. I spent more than 300 nights sleeping in a stiff, vinyl recliner in my father's ICU room, becoming an expert in the rhythms of the hospital. I learned how to suction the tracheostomy tube in his throat when the overnight nurse was overwhelmed. When my mother was finally discharged, I learned how to administer her at-home chemo infusions because the home healthcare service was chronically understaffed. By the 8th month, I could start an IV line in a dimly lit room with my eyes half closed from exhaustion. After 6 long weeks, my father emerged from the coma, but the hemorrhage had damaged the speech center of his brain. For 8 solid months, he was trapped in silence. He could communicate only with nods and by squeezing my hand, twice for yes, once for no. My mother's hands trembled so violently from the chemo that she couldn't sign her own name on legal forms. A hospital social worker, a kind woman with tired eyes, sat me down with their on-staff estate lawyer. The law in Colorado was blunt. If both parents were medically incapacitated, a legal guardian had to be appointed to manage their affairs, or the state would intervene. They signed the power of attorney documents that afternoon, their signatures shaky, illegible marks on a line, witnessed by 2 nurses and a notary, who came up to the neurology ward. In that moment, with the stroke of a pen, I became the acting CEO of Vance Dynamics, the family's medical device company. There was no salary, no formal title, just the crushing weight of a 90-person company that manufactured specialized surgical tools. I was 35 and my days became a grueling routine, pushing my mother's wheelchair to her morning radiation appointments, then racing to the office to run a company I knew nothing about. I spent my nights devouring corporate finance tutorials on YouTube and poring over SEC filings until 3 or 4 in the morning, long after the night nurse had finished her rounds. I was the one signing vendor agreements, authorizing payroll for 90 families, and negotiating with insurance behemoths, all while my father watched me from his hospital bed, his eyes filled with a silent, helpless apology. All this time, my brother Leo was a ghost. The last we'd heard, he was somewhere in Arizona, spiraling into an opioid addiction that started with a back injury on a construction site. 18 months before my father's hemorrhage, he'd been arrested for possession with intent to distribute. A judge gave him an ultimatum: a year in a mandatory residential rehab facility or a prison sentence. He chose rehab. The program had a strict no-contact policy for the first 6 months to sever ties with enabling influences. After that, he simply chose not to call. My mother kept his bedroom pristine, a perfect time capsule, as if he were just away at some prestigious university instead of having vanished after a drug charge. I didn't have the energy or the time to track him down. Every single dollar the company made went to keeping the factory lights on and funding my mother's experimental immunotherapy, a treatment our insurance provider had rejected twice. I wrote the appeals myself, spending nights researching medical journals and legal precedents, eventually flying to Chicago to plead her case directly with the insurance board. We won. Around the 14th month, my father began speech therapy and managed to whisper his first words, "Thank you." Around the same time, my mother's scans showed the tumors were shrinking. For the first time in over a year, I allowed myself a fragile sliver of hope. I thought we were finally turning a corner. I was so wrong. That corner was still years away, and what lay around it was worse than anything I could have imagined. The morning the doorbell rang, I was running on 36 hours of no sleep, surrounded by a mountain of payroll reports at the kitchen table. I opened the door, a cold mug of coffee in my hand, and saw Leo standing on the porch. He held a single, faded duffel bag. He looked gaunt, but clean. His eyes were clear, a clarity I hadn't seen since he was a teenager. "I finished the program," he said, his voice raspy. 14 months sober. "The court let me out 3 weeks ago." My mother came rushing from the living room, her robe flying behind her. She took one look at him and burst into tears, clinging to him as if he were a soldier returned from a long and brutal war. Within the hour, she was on the phone, calling every aunt, uncle, and cousin in a 100-mile radius. By lunchtime, the house was filled with the smell of cinnamon rolls and the cloying scent of unearned forgiveness. And that afternoon, the great revision of history began. My mother sat my father down in his favorite armchair, and in a voice loud enough for me to hear from the hallway where I was sorting her medications, she began to spin a new narrative. Leo hadn't been an addict in rehab. He had been finding himself out west. He was networking with potential suppliers in Phoenix. He'd been taking online business courses to prepare for his future. Every hard, ugly truth was meticulously sanded down and polished into a gleaming, heroic fiction. By dinner time, the official family story was set in stone. Leo was not a recovering addict. He was an entrepreneur in training, a prodigal son returned to claim his birthright. The very next day, he walked into Vance Dynamics as if he owned the place. My mother escorted him straight to the executive suite, introducing him to the senior leadership team as the future of the company. Martin Finch, the COO and my father's old college friend, a man whose job I had personally saved by keeping the company solvent, shook Leo's hand with a reverence usually reserved for royalty. He asked my brother if he'd like his new corner office repainted. 3 days later, my company login credentials stopped working. I called the IT department. "Sorry, Ellie," the tech mumbled. The COO ordered a system-wide password reset, new security protocols. It was a lie, and we both knew it. I was locked out. The invitations to board meetings vanished from my calendar. When I confronted my father about it, he just shrugged, avoiding my eyes. "Your mother thinks it's time for Leo to take the reins," he said, his voice weak. "You've done enough." But I kept showing up. I started using the side entrance in the factory, working from an abandoned cubicle on the 3rd floor. I found and corrected critical pricing errors in contracts Leo had drafted, mistakes that would have cost us hundreds of thousands of dollars. I approved purchase orders that were mysteriously never countersigned. I sent urgent emails about supply chain disruptions that were met with digital silence. At night, I'd go home, microwave some leftovers, and then open my personal laptop. I would code until the first light of dawn, building something that no one in that house, no one at that company, knew existed. Leo started holding daily leadership meetings in the main conference room, the same room where I had once fought to save the company. He wore freshly ironed shirts my mother prepared for him each morning and spouted business jargon he'd clearly memorized from a podcast: synergy, vertical integration, disruptive growth. The same employees who used to bring me coffee now scurried to bring him his. The few who still met my gaze in the hallway would give a quick, nervous nod before hurrying away, as if acknowledging my existence was a fireable offense. My mother redecorated his bedroom that first weekend, installing a new desk and hanging framed photos of him as the high school football captain. She even put a little brass plaque on his door: Leo Vance, future CEO. Walking past it felt like a physical blow, the walls of my own home closing in on me. I stopped arguing. I stopped fighting for my place at the table. I just nodded, retreated to my shadow workstation, and continued to be the secret, silent life support of Vance Dynamics, all while they planned a coronation for a ghost. The night of the dinner, the grand chandelier cast a brilliant, unforgiving light over the dining room. 22 place settings of the finest china and silver waited on a sea of white linen. A hired catering staff moved silently, pouring a second round of champagne. Everyone who was anyone in our small Denver business community was there. Uncles who sat on the company's board, cousins who ran successful car dealerships, my father's oldest and most influential friends. My father stood at the head of the table, looking robust in a new suit my mother had chosen for him. His voice, once a whisper, was strong again. "Tonight is more than just a dinner," he began, raising his glass. "Tonight, we pass the torch. We secure the future of this family and this company. We entrust it to the next generation, to the one who has proven he has the vision and the drive to lead us." He turned and placed a heavy hand on Leo's shoulder. My brother was wearing a proud, self-satisfied grin he'd been practicing for a month. Last week, my father continued, his voice ringing with authority, I signed the final transfer documents, the full $112 million, the company equity, the real estate portfolio, the investment accounts. Everything now belongs to Leo. A wave of applause washed over the room. My Aunt Clara dabbed her eyes. My mother reached across the table and squeezed Leo's hand, her knuckles turning white. Then she looked directly at me, a sweet, venomous smile playing on her lips. He deserves it, Ellie, far more than you ever did. The words landed with the clean, sharp impact of a surgeon's scalpel. A few of our relatives shifted uncomfortably in their chairs. My Uncle Robert tried to start another round of applause, but it sputtered and died in the tense silence. That's when I pushed back my chair and stood up. The quiet in the room became absolute, the predatory stillness of a crowd that senses a confrontation. I walked the length of that table, my heels silent on the rug, and stopped right next to my father. Then I laid the 4 items down in the dead center of the white tablecloth. 1. The original signed power of attorney documents, creased and worn. 2. The keys to the house they no longer owned. 3. The single key to the vault where they kept their illusions. 4. The thick manila envelope sealed with the crimson wax of a notary, my own initials embossed in the center. The light from the chandelier made the seal gleam like a drop of fresh blood. I met my brother's smug stare, my own gaze calm and unwavering. Congratulations, I said again, my voice soft but carrying in the stillness. And then I turned and started for the door. I heard my father's short, contemptuous laugh. He thought he knew what was in that envelope, a pathetic letter of resignation, a desperate last-ditch plea for recognition. He used his butter knife to slice under the wax seal, ripping it open with a flourish. The first page slid out. His eyes darted across the header, then the second line, the third. The butter knife clattered to his plate. The blood drained from his face so quickly I could see the pallor spread from 20 feet away. He looked up at me, his mouth opening and closing like a fish, but no sound came out. And then he roared, a primal sound of pure fury that seemed to shake the very foundations of the house. You have got to be joking. My mother half rose from her seat. Arthur, what is it? What does it say? He couldn't speak. He just stared at the papers trembling in his hand as if they were on fire. My father's roar was still echoing off the ornate crown molding when he finally found his voice. He held the pages up, his hand shaking violently, and began to read aloud in a voice cracking with disbelief. 18 months ago, while Arthur Vance was in a coma and Carol Vance was deemed medically unfit due to chemotherapy treatment, Eleanor Vance, acting under a valid and duly executed state of Colorado, medical and durable financial power of attorney, did transfer 98% of all Class A voting shares of Vance Dynamics into the Apex Health Foundation, an irrevocable trust. He paused, swallowing hard, his eyes wide with horror. The trust, he continued, his voice a hoarse whisper, appoints one Isabel Shaw, licensed Colorado estate attorney, as sole and exclusive trustee. Under Colorado Statute Section 15-16-706, this trust is designated as irrevocable. This instrument, dated and notarized at Denver General Hospital, is effective immediately upon formal notification to all relevant financial institutions. A freeze clause is hereby activated. No transfer, sale, pledge, or distribution of assets involving prior shareholders may occur without the explicit consent of the trustee. Any and all attempts to revoke or amend this trust are null and void. The words hung in the dining room like toxic smoke. My Uncle Robert's jaw literally dropped open. Aunt Clara's champagne flute slipped from her fingers and shattered on the floor. No one moved. This can't be legal, my father rasped, looking around the room for support. At that moment, Martin Finch, my father's oldest friend and a 35-year board member, felt his phone vibrate in his jacket pocket. He pulled it out, glanced at the screen, and his face went as white as a sheet. Arthur, he said, his voice barely audible. He held up his phone for everyone to see the bright red banner of a bank alert. All corporate operating accounts, the line of credit, merchant services, everything has been frozen. As of midnight tonight, they're citing a notification from the trust's legal department that just came through. My mother made a choked, wounded sound and slid from her chair, caught by two of my cousins before she hit the ground. Leo lunged to his feet, his face a mask of rage, and pointed a trembling finger at me, still standing by the archway. "What the hell did you do?" he screamed, a vein throbbing in his neck. I didn't have to answer. The documents were speaking for me. My father fumbled with the next page, his voice rising in panic. Contingent beneficiary subject to trustee discretion. Apex Health Solutions, LLC, a Colorado entity established 3 years ago for the purpose of... His head snapped up, his eyes wild with dawning comprehension. "You built another company," he choked out. "With whose money?" He didn't need me to answer. He knew. It was paid for with 5 years of my sleepless nights. Martin spoke again, his voice grave. "Arthur, I just spoke with our bank manager. The freeze is absolute. They won't even honor the checks for tomorrow's payroll without approval from the new trustee. We're completely locked out." Someone's wife began to weep quietly. Leo vaulted across the table, knocking over glasses, trying to snatch the papers from my father's hand. My father clutched them to his chest, as if they were the only things left in the world. "You think you can steal my company from me?" he yelled at my back. "After everything we gave you?" I finally turned to face him, my voice flat and devoid of emotion. "You signed the power of attorney, Dad. Mom signed it too. You were both lucid and you both knew exactly what it meant. Colorado law doesn't care about your regrets." My mother, half conscious on the floor, whimpered, "We trusted you to help us, not to rob us blind." I held her gaze for a long moment. "I was helping you survive," I said quietly. "You just forgot to thank the person who kept you alive." "We'll sue!" Leo shrieked, his voice cracking. "We'll fight this in court!" But Isabel Shaw's name was on every single page, alongside the official seal of the Colorado Secretary of State. Irrevocable meant irrevocable. Every lawyer in that room knew it. Martin just shook his head slowly, a look of grim finality on his face. My father collapsed back into his chair, a puppet with its strings cut. The papers fluttered from his grasp, scattering across the table. The chandelier continued to shine down, bright and merciless, on 22 people suddenly realizing that the empire they had come to celebrate was no longer theirs. The phones began to explode before the caterers could even think about clearing the dessert plates. Martin's screen lit up with another bank alert, then my father's, then the phone of every board member in the room. The same notification, a banner of digital red, access revoked, trust freeze in effect. Aunt Clara was the first to flee, grabbing her coat and muttering an excuse about an early meeting. Uncle Robert followed, leaving his glass of port untouched. Within 10 minutes, the driveway was a chaotic ballet of reversing taillights. No one said goodbye. Just as the last guest peeled out of the driveway, an official email from Sterling Medical Group hit the executive team's distribution list. The subject line was brutally simple: final vendor selection for enterprise-wide OS. I had already read it an hour ago on my own phone. Sterling, a network of 18 hospitals across Colorado and western Kansas, represented a $62 million contract. The contract everyone assumed Vance Dynamics had secured. The contract that had just been awarded to Apex Health Solutions, my company. The one I had quietly registered out of a small co-working space in downtown Denver 3 years prior. The one I built with code written in the dead of night while the factory floor downstairs was still stamping out devices under my father's name. In the now empty dining room, my father read the email aloud, his voice hollow. Leo snatched the phone, scrolled through the message, and then hurled it with all his might against the stone fireplace. It shattered, scattering glass and circuits across the hearth. At 8:17 the next morning, every employee of Vance Dynamics received a mass text from HR. Due to unforeseen banking restrictions, payroll for the current period has been suspended. Updates to follow. By 9 a.m., the employee group chats were a wildfire of panic and outrage. The head of accounting posted a tearful video from the parking lot after her direct deposit was rejected. The family's longtime attorney, Robert Mills, finally answered my father's 19th frantic call. I could hear every word from the kitchen. "Arthur, I'm sorry," Robert said, his tone formal. "This is a clear conflict of interest. The trust has placed Isabel Shaw's firm on retainer. I can no longer represent you in any capacity. You'll need to find new counsel." Click. Leo stormed upstairs. A few minutes later, we heard the sickening sound of splintering wood and shattering glass. My mother ran up after him, screaming his name. Something heavy crashed in the upstairs hallway. I later found out it was the mahogany dresser she had bought him as a graduation gift. My father sat on the bottom step of the main staircase, his head in his hands, just staring at the scattered trust documents. He kept muttering numbers under his breath. 112 million, 62 million, the outstanding balance on the mortgage, my mother's mounting medical bills. I stood in the kitchen, sipping coffee I couldn't taste, and watched the final gurgling breaths of an empire I had both saved and destroyed. By noon, the Denver Post had the story on its website. Someone from Sterling had leaked the contract announcement, and someone from the bank had leaked the freeze. The headline was merciless: Denver medtech giant paralyzed overnight as new AI startup snatches crown jewel contract. My own phone buzzed, but with a different kind of notification. It was a Series B term sheet from a venture capital fund in Silicon Valley I'd been in quiet talks with for months. They had just seen the news about the Sterling contract and had dramatically increased their valuation of my company. I replied to their congratulations with a simple thumbs-up emoji and then turned off the screen. Upstairs, the sounds of destruction had subsided, replaced by Leo's racking sobs. My mother was trying to comfort him, but he shoved her away so hard she stumbled back against the banister. My father didn't even look up. He just kept tracing the same paragraph on the trust document with his finger, the one that stated, in cold, hard legalese, that not a single share could ever be returned to him. The law was ironclad. Final. The house fell silent save for my mother's broken sobs. I placed my empty coffee mug in the sink, picked up the small overnight bag I had packed 2 days before, and walked out the front door into the crisp November air. It tasted like freedom. 9 months later, the for sale sign in front of the Denver house was faded and crooked. The old Vance Dynamics sign on the highway had been taken down in the spring, replaced by a generic auction banner. Chapter 11. Bankruptcy had lasted just 11 weeks before the judge converted it to a Chapter 7 liquidation. By June, the factory's advanced machinery was sold for scrap to a distributor in Utah. The company that had employed 90 people simply vanished. The house was next. The mortgage was in my parents' names alone. The trust had never touched their personal real estate. The bank foreclosed and the house was sold at a sheriff's auction on a Tuesday morning to a young couple who got it for a fraction of its worth. They posted pictures on social media a week later, showing off new quartz countertops and fresh paint, with no trace of the family that had lived there for nearly 3 decades. Leo lasted 73 days. He relapsed and was picked up by police, passed out in a stolen car with a backpack full of pills. He took a plea deal, 18 months in a state correctional facility with mandatory treatment. My mother cried as they led him away. My father didn't even show up to the courthouse. They moved into a cramped, 1-bedroom apartment over a laundromat. My father's Social Security and a small pension totaled just over $4,000 a month. My mother's Medicare covered most of her follow-up care, but the co-pays and prescription costs devoured half of every check. They bought their food with government assistance and kept the heat turned down to 62 degrees to save money. Every lawsuit they filed died a swift and predictable death. The judges all cited the same facts. The powers of attorney were legally executed, witnessed, and notarized, while both grantors had full legal capacity. Regret was not, the court affirmed, grounds for revocation. Case dismissed with prejudice. My father aged a decade in those 9 months. He stopped answering calls from the few old friends who still bothered to check in. My mother tried to contact me once. She sent an email from a public library computer. It said, "We are so sorry. Please, we have nothing left." I never replied. I had closed that email account months ago. The last time I drove past the old house, the new owners had put up Halloween decorations. A smiling, inflatable ghost waved from the lawn where Leo and I had learned to ride our bikes. I just kept driving. Today, my office is on the 42nd floor of a glass tower in downtown Denver. From my window, I can see the Rocky Mountains, a solid, unchangeable line on the horizon. The logo on the glass wall reads, Apex Health Solutions, with our NASDAQ ticker, AHS, underneath. We went public 4 months ago, opening at a valuation of $1.9 billion. The stock has nearly doubled since. My office is minimalist and quiet. White oak floors, floor-to-ceiling windows, and a single white orchid on a credenza. There are no photographs on my walls, no pictures of family, nothing to remind me of that house, of hospital recliners, of the smell of antiseptic and betrayal. I changed all my numbers the day I walked out. I blocked every relative, every old acquaintance. My assistant is a fortress. No message has ever gotten through. Sometimes, late at night, I pull up the Zillow listing for the old house. The algorithm thinks I'm an interested buyer. It doesn't know I'm just performing a system check, confirming that the past is still where I left it. I never went back. Not for holidays. Not when a social worker called from the county hospital to say Leo had overdosed again. I let the phone ring until it went to voicemail. Reporters sometimes ask if I feel guilty. They want a story of revenge and regret. But I don't feel regret. I don't feel triumph either. Revenge is a meal that tastes like ash. What I feel, mostly, is quiet. The profound, peaceful quiet that settles in when the screaming in your own head finally stops. I kept a company alive. I took 5 years of exhaustion and grief and spun it into software that predicts patient outcomes with 94% accuracy. I created over 400 jobs. I funded 2 free health clinics in the city, clinics that bear my mother's maiden name, not because I wanted her gratitude, but because I needed to make something good out of the wreckage. That's the part people don't understand. This was never about taking something from them. It was about refusing to let my sacrifice be handed over as someone else's unearned prize. My legal name is still Eleanor Vance, but when people ask what the V in my life now stands for, I tell them it stands for Vance, but in my head it stands for validation. Some lessons are brutally expensive, but they are lessons nonetheless. Never give more of yourself than you can afford to lose. Never confuse a family's tolerance for true forgiveness. And if the day ever comes when they try to give your life's work to someone who wasn't there for the struggle, remember this: the law is a tool, and it can be a weapon if you're the only one in the room willing to pick it up. I don't forgive. I don't look back. And the only inheritance I ever truly wanted, I gave to myself.